Good morning, everybody. We'll give it one more minute here and then we'll get started. All right, it's 10 o'clock, so I want to welcome everybody to the Manufacturing and Distribution Executive Roundtable. My name is Wes Beham. I lead the Manufacturing and Distribution team here at GJM. These roundtables we like to do about 3 times a year. Again, typically we do them in person, but obviously during COVID we'll be doing these remotely until it's safe for everyone to get back together again. We have a great agenda today. First, we're going to hear from Bob Bobeck, who's our resident expert on the PPP loan and the CARES Act. So there's certainly been some changes and updates since our last webinar there. Second, we're going to hear from Kip Winsler regarding NOMA, the Northwest Ohio Manufacturing Alliance. And he's going to talk, him and his team are going to talk about the apprenticeship grants that are available for manufacturers. And our featured speaker is RSM's Deputy Chief Economist, Kevin Depew, who's going to talk to us about the post-election economy and what to expect. 2 quick housekeeping items. First, feel free to ask questions in the chat box to the right. If we'll try and get to those Q&As either at the end of each segment, or we'll make sure to get back to you after the presentation. And the second, if you need CPE credit after the presentation, please email myself or Kelly, who should be on the initial email that you got. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to kick it off to Bob Bobeck, who's going to give us an update on the PPP program.
Thank you, Wes. Good morning, everyone. Just want to keep this short and sweet. In the past presentations, I've been given a number of loans, and there was over $5.2 million PPP loans granted that will be going through the forgiveness process that's started already. And again, there is a simplified loan forgiveness process for loans under $50,000, but no other changes have occurred in that process. We were hoping that there would be simplification for loans under $2 million, but unfortunately that is tied up in Congress and Senate. So right now we're recommending clients and friends to go ahead and start filing their forgiveness applications. It could take up to 90 days to get SBA approval. And so we'd like to get that process started as soon as possible because there's going to be 5.2 million applications going through, and you need to get in line. For those loans over 2 million, I think you're all aware there's a questionnaire out there. That's not final yet, but I think it will end up being something very similar to what's out there. If you need a copy, we can send it to you for loans greater than 2 million. Don't forget that if there are loans in the affiliated groups, so I know a lot of organizations maybe have multiple entities that file for a simple PPP loan through each one of their entities. You need to combine these to see if you meet the $2 million threshold. And then you might be requested to do a questionnaire. There are approximately 31,000 loans at that level right now. The questionnaire is out there. I don't believe it's final yet, but it's out there. Don't quite understand truly if everyone must do it or not. It's been said that, but it's truly not out there yet, whether or not that's going to be their process. They're going to be doing some sampling. But it's a lot of work to do one of those questionnaires, so I would jump on it and get started on that. The tax deductibility of expenses related to PPP loan still is unchanged. The IRS have ruled that you cannot deduct those expenses, so in theory makes the PPP loan forgiveness income taxable. There was a law passed by the Democratic House of Representatives in the summer that corrected this. And again, this is being reconciled currently with the Senate bill, and it's tied up in Congress. So hopefully we'll get something through. My gut tells me, again, it's my opinion. I know there's a lot of opinions out there that we will ultimately get some relief there, but it's not there yet. And the last thing I've been getting a lot of calls on is that we're going through a third wave now. Unfortunately, there is a rising number of people being affected with the virus and forced to stay home or quarantined by the health department if they have the virus, or if they were, they're doing some contact tracing now and also suggesting those people stay home. So before the CARES Act was passed, the first act passed by Congress was the Family First Coronavirus Response Act. And this was saying that if you have employees that were forced to stay home and you paid those employees, there ultimately was a tax credit that you could claim on your 941 payroll tax credit to offset these costs. And so I've now been getting a lot of questions about that, and it's still out there. So if you need any information about that, please feel free to reach out to us. So that's all I got here, Wes.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Appreciate that. Don't see any questions right off the bat. So again, if anybody has any questions on the PPP loan, certainly feel free to reach out to us, and we can help you walk through any of those pieces. So next, I'd like to turn it over to Kip Winsler. Kip is representing NOMA, and he's going to tell us about the current state of NOMA, and his team will talk about the apprenticeship grants that are currently available.
Thank you, Wes. I don't know if we've got the slides coming up yet or not. There they are. So just a little bit quick on NOMA, what it is and what we're trying to accomplish, and then I'll hand it off to Sarah Stubblefield from Northwest State, and we'll kind of walk through some programs that the state on behalf of the OMA have regarding apprenticeships. So just real quick, NOMA, you know, who we are, what we are. We're technically a industry sector partnership, if you hear that term. It's not a new concept. The OMA kind of endorsed sector partnerships for manufacturers about 2 or 3 years ago, and we started Northwest Ohio Manufacturing Alliance probably 18 months ago, give or take. And it's really just a grassroots organization that I kind of led by businesses. We've got members that are, you know, educators and workforce development and all that. But the idea is it just focuses on a few very small issue or vital issues for a specific industry segment. There's about 20 of them throughout the state of Ohio, which there's quite a network amongst them. Which is one of the benefits I think that we receive is there's some pretty mature industry sector partnerships over in the Akron area that we can lean on for different things. You know, really what our mission is, you know, it's really partnershiping with educators and workforce and economic development. We are not a training facility. We are not writing curriculum. We're just really a voice of manufacturers on, you know, kind of communicating with those groups as to what our needs are and supporting them where we can. So currently we're you know, we're looking in 3 different areas. You can see there kind of address the talent shortage. We've worked with Jobs Ohio on some different things when they reached out to us wanting to know, you know, what are really the in-demand skills that you guys are looking for, some of that kind of stuff. Working with educators, trying to figure out what curriculums they have. Some of those kinds of things. So we're really a sounding board kind of in that arena. The second one is communicating career pathways. I think the rest of this presentation will be a portion of that, and that is when we get into these industry recognized apprenticeship programs, they're really stackable skills and kind of working with inside of our businesses and with employees and those seeking jobs, kind of helping them understand what the opportunities are in the training side and building up skill sets And then last is change the stigma. Anybody that's in manufacturing is well aware that we ran manufacturing in the ground for the last 30 years. And as a result of that, there's quite a headwind amongst folks, primarily parents and the older generation who were told that manufacturing's dead. So part of our mission and challenge is it certainly is to try to help change that. I think the impression of manufacturers today, everybody's heard it, dirty, dark, and dangerous kind of things. So we work with local schools and obviously manufacturing days and all those kinds of things, help and support our educators and really communicate the message to manufacturers. We're in 6 counties. So, Wood and Lucas, Defiance, Henry, Fulton, and Williams, kind of our footprint. There's the grant that we're looking at, you'll see on the next slide or two, is 11 counties. There's really no magic behind the boundaries other than we just wanted to create some kind of focus. You'll see on the last thing there where to find us. Our website is nomapartners.org, or you can get a hold of me if you'd like more information about it. One thing I will say is we are a 501c3, and we're currently in the process of working with the Toledo Regional Chamber. It's just happened within the last month or two. They've got a lot of resources and are really, focused on talent development and some of that kind of stuff along with us. So we're really looking at some opportunities there. Is there any questions? Certainly reach out. I appreciate your time. I will hand it off to Sarah if you want to jump in here.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yep, can hear you.
Apparently I have a low internet connection, and so it's asking me to turn off my webcam. So we'll do that. We are discussing today a specific project that NOMA is partnering with Northwest State, and actually it's a statewide project. It's called Ohio Manufacturing Workforce Partnership. This is funded by a grant from the Department of Labor, and the entire state was divided into different regions, and we are in Region 1. Just a few elements. These are really our value statements for the project. We're looking for collaboration between all of our regional stakeholders. We'd like to see some innovation, maybe try some new programs or upskill some programs that we have currently. And then education piece, as Kip was talking about, is to really raise awareness about the opportunities in manufacturing across the region. So our goal is to adopt and expand both non-registered and registered apprenticeship programs, or learn and earn pathways. We have a large section that we're covering in Region 1. We go diagonal from Williams to Wyandotte, and there is an allocation for innovative funds to help us either start a new program like seed money, or to really expand on an idea that has been successful. And the goal is to train 617 people by 2023, and to create sustainable programs and registered apprenticeship programs or non-registered apprenticeship programs that go on for a long time after this grant ends. We are focusing on youth that are over 17 and outside of school, but anybody can come in, unemployed, underemployed, or incumbent workers. There's also a focus on veterans, women, people of color, and ex-offenders. And that's a Department of Labor guidance that they're asking us to target. In our region, we've identified production jobs, machining, welding, industrial maintenance, and automation and robotics as the focus. And when I say apprenticeship programs, typically people think of that 4-year, highly structured program registered by the Department of Labor. And it could be anything. But there are 5 core hallmarks that we would want individuals to have in their programs. And one is that they're paid. There's really no restriction there other than we can't go through temp agencies, just that they are earning a wage while they learn. In terms of OJT training and mentorship, think of mentor as a trusted guide. It is somebody who is helping an individual navigate the culture of an organization and learn how to be successful in the field that they're studying in. That educational training component ties into that as well, because the training should be related to one of those career occupations that I listed earlier, like robotics or automation or maintenance. And an individual should earn an industry recognized credential. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then the last component is really just to provide a working environment that it follows the applicable state and federal laws that you would want anybody to be working under. So an industry recognized credential is something that is verified by a third party, and it also would be recognized anywhere in the country. If you think of something like a NIMS credential or an MSSC or even an associate's degree or short-term certificate, right? If I say those things to you, you have an idea of someone probably studied, then they took a test that was provided by some sort of proctor, and now that they have that credential under their belts, they can go, to Florida or anywhere else and say, here's what I learned. And that's an industry recognized credential. This OMWP project is providing a lot of supports, and there's a learning network through Ohio TechNet that we all tune in every other Tuesday and listen to best practices and other manufacturers. There's open educational resources that goes with that as well. So as I work for Northwest State as an educational provider, it's nice that there are resources out there for training. We don't have to develop all the curriculum from scratch. And for manufacturers, we're trying to help them identify and braid funding so that it can be confusing sometimes between Ohio Means Jobs and Job and Family Services and this grant or that grant. And the goal here is that we maybe create one document that someone can refer to in order to braid that funding. But what I really wanted to talk to you about today is some of the case management services and other services that we have. We can assist you with designing a program. If you already have a learn and earn program or an apprenticeship program at your facility or organization and you want to expand it or maybe add a credential, we can help you identify what that would be. We can also serve as a sponsor if you did want to go through the registered apprenticeship route. And what we can do is, if any person who is an apprentice, we can help them understand what classes they need to take next, how do they get registered, and really kind of guide them through that entire pathway. Kip, I don't know if you have anything you'd like to say at this point.
Yeah, I will. I'll jump in here. Somebody made the mistake of giving me a presenter ID, so I can jump in the middle of this. Just a example, I think kind of some of the background, and this was long before we got involved, but I think, the Department of Labor and obviously, getting feedback and hearing from businesses and industries about what their struggles are. I think the traditional apprenticeship program was kind of a time-based program and really comes out of a lot of the trades, and what the feedback they were getting was the time-based is from business standpoint, we just don't have the time to invest with folks like that. And in this program, the industry recognized apprenticeship program really moves from a time-based to more of a competency-based program. And it didn't mean a whole lot to me until we kind of got working with Northwest State on some of this. And what we found out, we kind of focused on our maintenance programs. And a good example is we had kind of sat down and like most of us, we took a look at the programs they offered, and we kind of picked and chose a la carte what we wanted, and kind of tailored it to our own needs. And At the end of the day, it was a 2-year certificate, but our guys probably wouldn't get the certificate because we had chosen, well, we don't need this class and we don't need that class. And the more I've gotten involved in this, my thoughts have really changed on this whole idea. And there's a couple things that have kind of changed my mind. Number one, I like there's a difference for individuals, for the employees, if they have a industry recognized credential, a third party, versus, hey, I've taken a couple classes, or I've taken the Altno Brink ad hoc in-house training program, right? When they're from the value that it creates in the employee's mind, number one. From this employer standpoint, I think it allows us to create some value for those employees, instead of saying, hey, I need you to carve out a few hours of your time to go out and take a class. We can sit down and we can take these credentials and we can show them, here's kind of the pathway if you choose it. Here's the bare minimum for this position in the competency test, and then you can move on and we'll create a pathway for you. We're really looking at this credentialing program, and this apprenticeship program for us is a real strong retention tool for people, because I think ultimately most people in business will sit there and look at their workforce and say, well, yeah, we've got needs for training, but we struggle trying to figure out what's the program, what's the process that we do, and that was kind of what came to light for me. The other thing that I would say real quick, that kind of initially I was like, nah, probably don't need that, I don't even know what the purpose of it is this whole mentorship idea. And originally I'm like, yeah, mentorship, that's fine. And then I got a little closer to what we do here at Altno Brink, and we do a miserable job helping new employees and employees that are moving and transitioning into different positions, helping and guide them, and as kind of assisting them. And we kind of leave them out on an island once we transition them. And I like the idea of mentorship and kind of creating that ownership and that accountability. I think, again, it just helps on that retention side a lot. Real quick, and then I'll jump off, is we're looking at maintenance programs, tooling program with NIMS credentials, which anybody that's familiar with them, it basically, on their site, they are a validator of performance. That's what they do. They don't teach classes, they don't do that. We'll lean on our education partners to help us develop and work through their curriculum for our maintenance and our tooling folks on the NIMS credentials, and then the ASQ standards for quality we're looking at, and then ultimately supervision. And the reason I bring those up is those are apprenticeship programs for us that we're building, and they're probably very different from what most people will immediately think of when they hear the word apprenticeship program. They probably are thinking more like pipe fitters and electricians in some of the traditional apprenticeship programs that come out of the trades and those time-based programs. So I just bring that up to say, if you're sitting there going, well, we don't have a need for apprenticeship program because I don't need a 4-year experienced, mentored electrician. I just need somebody who can do electrical maintenance inside of our facility. These programs are really designed around that competency. And I think the credentials kind of gives it that third party status and kind of that objective view. And then obviously the other 3 or 4 hallmarks that Sarah had already mentioned kind of fill out that program. So at that, I will just leave it. If anybody's got any questions for us later, we certainly can.
Great, thanks, Kip, and thanks, Sarah. NOMA is really a great program. These grants available could definitely help some of our manufacturing companies out there. So if you'd like to hear any more information, There is a NOMA handout PDF that's attached to this webinar you could download, or if you need any more information, feel free to reach out to myself or Kip and we can get that information. So now I would like to present Kevin Depew. As I said, he's RSM's Deputy Chief Economist. Kevin provides clients with macroeconomic and industry perspectives and insights they need to successfully manage their middle market businesses. He helps produce two unique reports, The Real Economy and the RSM US Middle Market Business Index, which offer insights into the trends and attitudes relevant to the middle market. So with that, I would like to introduce Kevin Depew.
All right, well, thanks very much, and hopefully, can everyone see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, very good. So I thought a good place to start would be to look at where we are in our progression from a crisis. These are the 4 R's of crisis management, if you will. And so you can see the first one there is the initial reaction to the crisis, followed by the resilience that we've already shown. And I would say we're somewhere between 2 and well into 3. And one of the themes that I think will emerge from here is how we reimagine a number of areas that have likely permanently changed as a result of the pandemic, notably the work from home situation, and probably to some extent consumption overall, which we'll take a closer look at. When we get into the U.S. economic recovery and expansion, we've had a really resilient rebound, all things considered. It's been led by housing and manufacturing. Those 2 segments are, on the surface, they look like they're only about 17% of the U.S. economy, but housing and manufacturing have a far outsized impact on economic growth in the U.S. than that 17% would indicate. Because there are ancillary services that are attached to it, as well as longer-term quality of life issues and standard of living issues that emerge from those 2 sectors. Driven, if you think about the areas of the economy that have been most resilient, obviously technology, telework, automation, and the major risk to the economic outlook continues to be this second wave of the pandemic. And just for our purposes, we really view what's happening now as the second wave emerging in the states that were hardest hit in the spring. So if you think about the Northeast and then all the migration that occurred from the spring, late spring into the early summer, and then resulted in an increase in really an exporting of the virus from the Northeast and Upper West into the Sun Belt in the South. Then you had some of the events over the summer, 4th of July, the motorcycle rally in Sturgis, which proved to be a big super spreader event with 200-some thousand people. And so these are the effects of it. And so for a lot of the places, this is the first go around with dealing with the pandemic as we start to see the virus increase in parts of the Northeast that were hard hit in the spring. Then that would be the true second wave that we would be experiencing then. In terms of the growth picture this year, Q1 not so great because it captured some of the initial stage of the pandemic, and then the horrific second quarter of 2020 decline of minus 31.4% in GDP. Now that was followed by a record-breaking 33.1% rebound, but that still, as we will see, leaves us well below. There's a significant output gap. We would have needed to see Q3 rebound at 53% in order for there to be a true V shape to the economy. And I think it's pretty intuitive. If we look around, we understand that there still continues to be probably about 20 to 25% of the economy, depending on where you are located, that remains impaired as a result of the pandemic. Our Q4 forecast is for 2.75% growth, and then a continued normalization once we get into 2021. The main issue obviously continues to be the employment picture, and some not so good news today that we saw an increase in initial jobless claim filings to 742,000. So that reverses what had been really a slow decline since the awful numbers that we were seeing in the spring. Right now, the headline unemployment rate is 6.9%. We think the real unemployment rate, when you factor in those people who have dropped out of the workforce and are no longer looking for employment, is probably a little bit more than 8%. there are 2 unemployed workers for every 1 job opening. So that does alleviate some of the talent shortage, but it's also very specific. It really is dependent upon the level of skill that is needed for the job opening. And in many cases, those job openings are higher skilled. And so even though there is more unemployment now than there was pre-pandemic, obviously, it's unlikely to really alleviate some of the talent issues that remain for many employers, especially on the manufacturing side. We think that there will be some continued improvement when we do get jobless claim or the non-farm payrolls at the end of this month, probably declining to 5.9% by the end of 2021. So it's just going to be a slow and very steady recovery. In terms of the policy outlook, especially now that we have at least some degree of election results, which I'll talk more about momentarily, we will likely see further rounds of fiscal aid. They are necessary, and unfortunately, the policy impasse in DC right now is increasingly problematic. I think if anything, the data that we see between now and January 20th, when there will be at least some administration sworn in again, is the likelihood that we will start to move on fiscal stimulus at that point. It's just going to really delay the recovery because of the level of unemployment and the lack of incomes that are in the economy right now. We are a little more optimistic on infrastructure now being more likely, the scope possibly more broad than what had been considered before. And again, the potential for vaccines, if anything, I think that we're likely becoming a little bit overly pessimistic about where the economy is. And I don't, certainly if you consider that the pandemic is a transitory event. And if I go back to the spring, we really had essentially this wall in front of us, which were how are we going to manage the spread of the pandemic? And then at what point will we see major therapeutic breakthroughs, which will alleviate some of the concern about interacting in the economy? And at what point will we start to see vaccines become available? Well, we're at the point now where we will see vaccines available sooner rather than later. So that's very good news. We estimate that there's about $4 trillion in impaired economic activity that ultimately will be unleashed once the vaccines are distributed broadly in the economy. That's going to take time because of the distribution logistics and the ability to be able to take the vaccine out to hundreds of millions of people. But I do think that there is some pessimism, especially because even though now we can start to see light at the end of the tunnel, we still know that the winter's ahead of us. We still see the virus spreading in many of our communities. We know that between now and then the day that vaccines become available widely, there are going to be some months, maybe 6, maybe 9 or 10 months, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through here. One of the biggest beneficiaries of the likely new administration is that you will see amending of fences with trading partners. Now, I know that for some who have not minded the president's and the administration's aggressive stance in the utilization of tariffs, that what I would say is that this does open the door to reducing global trade frictions, which benefits everyone from an economic standpoint. North America trade will likely see a very robust recovery. There is the possible re-entry into the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And while the China tensions will remain, the tariff frictions will likely be reduced in the Biden administration. The shape of the recovery, my colleague Joe Brusuelas has characterized it as a Nike swoosh. And what he means by that is that the recovery is going to be slow and very elongated and frustrating in some industries until we get to the point where vaccines are widely available. You may have heard some commentary recently about a K-shaped recovery, and I think a better way of characterizing it is that over the past 20 years, we've really developed a K-shaped economy. And what we mean by that is if you think of the letter K, there's that upper K path, which is where the high-paying jobs are located, those that are associated with telecommunications, all of those things that are enabling business to continue now. So the working from home, having these kinds of events, those are all part of that upper K path. And the consumer-facing The minimum wage jobs, those were hardest hit in the early stages of the pandemic and continue to show up in initial weekly jobless claims. They're on the lower K path, and we'll look at some more data to give you a little bit more of a sense of what we mean by that. Going back to the reimagination phase, I think particularly when you look at services, when you look at commercial real estate and retail, you will see some reimagination of what it means for those industries. And particularly when we start to recognize, as is already the case, that maybe some of us had a little bit more office space than we needed, especially in places like professional services and in high density urban areas. So I have here the morning after, but it's really apparently going to be the months after the administration, or at least the president and his campaign have made clear that they're going to push it, and all of the things that we're seeing now, whether it's in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin and Georgia, the legal challenges in Nevada are simply designed to prevent state certification of those results, with the idea of forcing it to the Supreme Court, and then potentially, although very unlikely, forcing it into the House of Representatives, in which case, although the House is led by a slim Democratic majority, because of the block voting that would occur if the House is to decide the presidency, it's likely that President Trump may have some slight edge there. Those are the Supreme Court and the House determination of election results are very low probability events. But until we get to the point where we have certification, and probably until we get to January 6th, which is when Congress is required by law to certify the Electoral College vote, there's probably going to be this continued tension, the lack of transition, the lack of bringing in the new administration and being fully forthcoming. That's just, it's become clear that that's the game plan by President Trump in the campaign. That aside, you can see there's really not there are a few major differences here, but given depending on what happens in Georgia, it's likely that the Republicans will retain control of the Senate. Democrats will have their slim majority in the House. And so all of that may actually prove beneficial if you're thinking about it from a financial markets and a financial conditions standpoint. Then all of that means that's this quote unquote gridlock that may persist. You'll see some unlocking of policy maneuvers, specifically with respect to infrastructure, which we think will be increasingly probable under a Biden administration. That those are some of the significant differences that are going to go to fuel what we believe is going to be on the other side of the pandemic, a very robust and very hot economy. It's really a matter of trying to get through on the business side the next 6 to 9 months until the vaccines begin to be widely available and people can become more comfortable going out, and we can see economic capacity move back up toward 100%. We've talked a little bit about the mending of trade relationships with Canada, Mexico, EU, UK. And so even if you think about the relationship that we've had with our largest trading partners, Canada and Mexico, and our other important trading partners in the European Union and the UK, the rhetoric, while superficial, does act as a bit of an economic headwind. It makes policy less certain. It makes it more difficult to be able to plan on the business side. And so all of that acts as friction that restrains economic growth. And over the past 4 to 8 years, we've definitely seen that. 8 years ago, when we were in the early stages of the recovery from the Great Recession, and then 4 years ago, as the trade policy began, the tariff policy began to be utilized as part of trade policy, you've seen business capital expenditures restrained significantly. In fact, one of the reasons that we've been around that 2% growth area for much of the past 8 years has been a result of repair from the Great Recession and then uncertainty around policy, specifically in trade and manufacturing. So as global trade volumes have declined, all of those have been acting as a headwind on growth overall. So this is a look at the Moodys Analytics and CNN Business back to normal indexes, the way they refer to it. You can see we're only at about 80% capacity, and that's really the main headwind that we have. The good news there is that unlike some recessions, which may be endemic to an industry because of, say, technological change or a declining demand, Most of the headwinds we face right now are a result of pandemic-specific issues that we know will eventually, even if we don't know when the eventually is, we know that eventually those will subside. And so there is a lot of pent-up economic activity that is likely to result in an economy that achieves to the upside versus one that continually surprises to the downside. If you look at the output gap I talked about, so this shows the 33.1% rebound in GDP growth and how far we are below capacity still. So that will eventually be resolved as we begin to open up more of the economy, as the vaccine becomes more widely available and distributed. Our own RSM US Middle Market Business Index, which tracks the health of the middle market in the United States, has already seen a significant rebound. You'll note that on this chart, beginning in Q1, when it became apparent the pandemic was moving to the United States, we went to a monthly reporting of this index versus quarterly. And so you can see sort of the roller coaster ride we've been in, the decline in the summer, as it looked like the virus had spread to the Sun Belt in the South and maybe affecting the parts of the Midwest. So even though this was taken before the presidential election in the most recent data point, it does show that even with the pandemic starting to affect more places that had been previously sort of shielded from it in the middle parts of the country in the early stages, the optimism in the middle market remains robust. It is a fairly healthy area of the economy. So here's the grim news that we have to get through, is that there continues to be labor market issues. So if you think about our on a weekly basis, our average weekly initial jobless claims were at about 210,000 per week. You can see the spike, almost around 7 million in the early stages of the pandemic in late March. And now we've moved to an average of 742,000 on a monthly basis. So to put that in context, prior to the pandemic, the two single worst weeks in the history of this data series, the first worst week occurred in 1982, when 665,000 initial jobless claims were filed before those quickly receded. The second worst week was in the heart of the Great Recession in March 2009, when we had 656,000 initial jobless claims. So here we are in 30 plus weeks of jobless claims that are above the two single worst weeks in the history of the data series. So while some of us have been able to get back to work and even in our 80% capacity economy, it does seem that things are normalizing. I would just caution that there continue to be issues in the labor market, and this is why we keep coming back to the idea that on December 31st, 2020, all of this pandemic insistence is going to end, and this pandemic assistance cliff that we're going to face will have significant consequences unless we're able to come to some kind of agreement on an additional fiscal stimulus package. This is a look at the number of unemployed people per job opening. You can see how elevated this was, about 6.5 at the worst part of the Great Recession. And so we have done a good job of limiting those. Many of the jobs that have been taken away initially were at the in those lower quintiles of income earners. What we're seeing more recently, however, is, and probably one of the reasons that you're starting to see claims move up again, is that 48 of 50 states have balanced budget requirements. And so unlike the federal government, that means that if they cannot balance their books, they have to start laying people off. Because of the fiscal end of many states in the fall, and then another December 15th fiscal year end for some states, you're starting to see those layoffs. And those typically are higher paying jobs. Those are jobs that are much harder to secure in the first place. And so that raises the risk that some of the consumption that we've seen to date will be jeopardized if we continue to see those higher paying jobs disappear. One of the things specifically that we have to anticipate with the likelihood of a Biden administration is that you will continue to see pressure to alleviate this discrepancy between average hourly earnings, now at $25 an hour overall, versus the federal minimum wage of $7.25. If you look back to 1964, minimum wage accounted for about 50% of hourly earnings on average. Now that has been 29%. And so that in itself is indicative of the K-shaped economy that we talked about. So this will have to change, and so it's unfortunate. I know that there's certainly many, or that some in manufacturing do rely on minimum wage workers. Most do not, especially in some of the more advanced manufacturing. But it is something that is going to create a headwind for businesses as they have to come to terms with these increases in minimum wages. When we look at the shortcoming in consumer spending, you can see that since January, overall spending is down 6.4%. And again, as indicated by that K-shaped economy, high-income earners have pulled back their spending by almost 10%, partly as a result of risk aversion, partly because there are just fewer places where higher income earners can spend it. Lower income earners have only pulled back spending by 2.5%. And that is a result of some of the pandemic unemployment assistance ending for some households, as well as the stress. Those are the households that are not net savers. They tend to be net spenders. They tend to live paycheck to paycheck and spend, if they get unemployment assistance or any kind of pandemic assistance, it goes directly back into consumption or to paying bills or medical expenses or household expenses. This is another look at those high income earners. So these are the personal savings rate, largely dominated by households with high income. That's you know, in the early stages that spiked because there was simply no place during the early shutdown to be able to spend money. And so now those have declined to still 14.1%, which is far and above levels that we've seen for any of the past 20 years. I know that one of the questions is about inflation, and so this is a look at long-term trends in U.S. inflation. You can see the December 2019 pre-COVID projection for inflation, as well as where we actually have ended up. And so, yes, when you do have what is the equivalent of 11.4% of GDP in the U.S. That has been used to mitigate some of the effects of the pandemic, eventually that bill will come due. One thing I would note is that that is a relative amount, because if you think about all the other governments in the world, they have done those similar things to be able to mitigate the effects of the virus. So on a relative basis, our position really hasn't much changed in the United States, but certainly longer term, there will be inflation implications. It's just that the disinflation as a result of the pandemic is what is foremost, should be foremost of importance for businesses. This is a look at the reason why we continue to see disinflation for the near term. The consumer price index for the rent of shelter, which are basically your rents, those have been fairly steady and increased significantly since the Great Recession ended. Those have declined. Your CPI excluding food and energy prices have been under pressure, has declined. CPI excluding rent and energy also in disinflation territory. So when we get to manufacturing, this again has been one of the bright spots, and part of it has to do with the quick rebound globally in manufacturing. So in U.S. manufacturing sentiment, the Institute for Supply Management Manufacturing, the overall index there in blue that shows the sharp V-shaped rebound. And more impressive is the ISM new orders component, which tends to lead, obviously, the blue line, and that's in green, which shows that after a little bit of resolution from the initial snapback and some of that pent-up demand has resumed moving higher. So, far and away above contraction territory, and certainly only a brief time in recession, which you'll note is much different than the experience in the prior two recessions. So whether it was the one that followed the dot-com crash and corporate debt bubble in early 2000s, or the Great Recession, which took a much longer time to recover from. So that is good news for manufacturing. When you look at U.S. industrial production, you can still see, it looks similar to the GDP chart, right? So you've had the sharp rebound, but it's still below capacity, which indicates, some of the ongoing impairment in the economy overall. And then global manufacturing, which is in similar shape. U.S., the most optimistic. Germany in pretty good shape. The UK in red, has flatlined a little bit, largely as a result of the pandemic resurgence in Europe. and then the China, which they saw their V shape a little bit sooner than ours. And the good news is that their experience, which hopefully ours will follow that, has continued to be above that contraction territory. Everybody's familiar with this curve, and it just goes to show, where we are now. This looks even worse because this was as of November 7th, and here we are almost 2 weeks later. Certainly looks worse. But what's next? And so this is the good news, because there are some positives on the horizon that weren't there 3 months ago. So the expected Pfizer distribution timeline, although there is not yet a national plan for distribution, there is some logistical plan, but there's not been any kind of serious explanation of how the distribution will occur. This is the expected timeline that we put together. And so some of the challenges that are faced by the distribution, well, first of all, you have the manufacturing, then you have the coordination at the federal, state, and local level, equitable and effective allocation or distribution and storage. The Pfizer vaccine will require cold storage, whereas the Moderna vaccine is one that has a little bit easier shelf life to manage. So the potential exists for, depending on where you're located, that if you have access to cold storage, then you may be first in line for the Pfizer vaccine. The Moderna vaccine, once it gets available, then because that's a little bit easier to take care of outside of the lab, then that vaccine may go to those areas that simply don't have the infrastructure available to accommodate that. In the phased rollout, then it's likely that the phase 1A, which is your healthcare and first responders, will potentially receive the Pfizer vaccine before the end of the year. Then we'll move into phase 1B with those are people with comorbidities and the elderly, approximately 100 million people in the U.S. So that would take us up till May. And then in phase 2, those who are in critical jobs and are additional elderly, another 94 million. That takes us to about the initial stage and just past the midpoint in 2021, where to date we have, because remember the Pfizer vaccine requires 2 doses. So if there are 400 million, that's really only 200 million virus dosage. We'll have to have some more manufacturing before that's fully rolled out to phase 3 and phase 4. And so I think realistically, we're looking at light at the end of the tunnel once we get into the spring. And once we understand how severe the virus is and how severe it's spreading in its current form, that it is important to start planning for what comes next. Because again, what comes next is going to be a very robust economy. Some of the things that could go right, because we tend to focus on all the risks that are out there. And I've put in green some of the ones that are happening right now, and red the ones that will likely be pushed back until we have additional clarity on the vaccine rollout. And then yellow are the ones we don't quite know about, but I'm somewhat optimistic about. So certainly we've seen innovation take off, even if you think about some of the manufacturing facilities or 3D manufacturing, where they switched gears and immediately began manufacturing additional ventilator parts or reconfiguring ventilators for multiple patient use and a device that was originally only intended for one person. You have that urban versus rural divide, which has been a characteristic of the economy since the Great Recession, where really your rural areas were left behind in the economic recovery. It was so densely, or so concentrated in those dense urban areas that had the high-tech infrastructure. Well, now as a result of the pandemic, there is a renewed interest in moving into areas that are outside of major cities. That creates new incentive for infrastructure development, which includes high tech. It includes new infrastructure for everything from education opportunities to businesses relocating in those rural areas. And so if we were wondering at what point, I remember if I go back to 1992 when I graduated from college, no one was going to live in New York City or major urban areas again. The infrastructure was terrible, the crime was bad, the cost of living was too high, the conditions were poor. Why would you do that to yourself? And then you fast forward 25 years later, no one's ever going to live in rural America again because there's no infrastructure. You have meth addiction or opioid use, which is increased crime. You don't have all the things, all the opportunities that are available in cities. Well, it just goes to show that when you get to that level of pessimism, then certainly something will come along to change it. And I think one of the positive outcomes, if there are any from the pandemic, it will be some of this redistribution and growth opportunities to rural areas and those areas outside of major cities versus urban areas. The other thing I would note, and particularly with respect to the hot economy that we're anticipating after this, is that you can anticipate that household balance sheets being much cleaner than where they were, especially for those top 2 quintiles of income earners, which account for about 60% of spending. The difference between households in aggregate, their balance sheets now versus prior to the Great Recession, is immense. And so that spending will be unlocked eventually. And as well, we're optimistic that eventually business investment will reawaken as well. So I'm going to stop there, stop sharing the screen, and see if we have any questions or comments.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I don't see any specific questions at the moment. Will the slides be available for us to send out, Kevin?
Yes, I will send those to you right after the broadcast here.
Perfect. Okay, great. Yeah, I like your comment there about the household balance sheets. I do think that is something that's important, and I do think that will definitely unlock the spending at some point. So that's definitely a good comment. Really great information. Really appreciate you taking the time to provide that information for our manufacturing construction clients that are out there. So we really appreciate that, and really want to say thank you to all of our presenters out there. Turn my camera on here. Thanks to all the presenters out there. NOMA, a lot of good information. Again, if anybody needs has any questions, let me know. And also Bob with the PPP loan. So appreciate that as well. So just right at about 11 o'clock. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Again, if anybody needs CPE, please reach out to Kelly or myself, and we'll make sure to get that to you. So if anybody else has any questions, let us know. Otherwise, have a good rest of the week, and be sure to be at home by 10 o'clock based on the governor's orders. So thanks a lot, and we'll wrap it up.